This video is going to cover working with worksheets in Excel VBA. So you can see here we have a workbook with 3 sheets on it currently, and each sheet contains different branch, location, loan information. So the first thing we want to do is go into the VBA editor window. You can do that by hitting Alt F11. Anywhere in this project window, I'm going to right click and select Insert Module. We'll call this module Selecting Sheets. And we'll call this subroutine Working with Sheets. So this is just a continuation of a beginner's guide to VBA in Excel. So we're going to start with some basic things here, like just simply selecting a sheet and the different ways you can do that. So I'm going to hit my keyboard shortcut Control and Spacebar. That will bring up this IntelliSense here, and I can start typing Worksheets, and in parentheses you can see it looks for an index, which can be one of two things. It can be the index number of the sheet in the collection of worksheets, or you can put the sheet name in double quotes. So that's what we'll do. We're currently on sheet 1, so we will select sheet 2. So I'll F8 through this. You can see down here we're currently on sheet 1, and once I execute this line, what we should see is sheet 2 become the active sheet. And there it is. Now we're going to do a similar thing, but this time we're going to select a sheet using the index number of the sheet. So I'm going to start typing Worksheets again. And this time we're going to select sheet 3. So I'm just going to reference the index number rather than the sheet name, and a full stop and the select method. So I'm going to F8 through this. Now this line of code here is not going to appear to do anything because sheet 2 is already selected. But when I execute this line of code, we should see sheet 3 become the active sheet. And it does. So these previous 2 methods will work so long as you don't plan on changing your sheet names or rearranging the order in which your sheets are displayed. So with this first method, if we were to change the name of sheet 2, this line of code would no longer work because there's no longer a worksheet with the name sheet 2. For this next line of code, if we were to rearrange the order of our sheets and move sheet 2 behind or after sheet 3, this would select sheet 2 because sheet 2 would be the third sequence in the series of sheets on our workbook. So there is a third and more reliable method to help avoid these pitfalls, which is using the code name of the sheet. So you can see up in our project window we have our 3 sheets. If I click on one, down in the properties window, we have in this first box the code name of the sheet, and then down here this secondary name box, which is what is reflected when you actually change the sheet name. So if I were to change the sheet name to branch 2 on our workbook and go back, you can see it gets updated down here in this second name box, but up here the code name is still sheet 2. So I can refer to this code name in our IntelliSense and then hit a full stop, and I get a set of options which I can then just select the select method. So now, before I run this, we need to update this because the sheet name is now branch 2. Otherwise, that line of code will give us an error message. So I'll F8 through this. Sheet 3 is now the active sheet, so when I execute this, what we should see is sheet 2 get activated again, which is called the branch 2 sheet. And there it is. So what if we wanted to select multiple sheets at once? You can see that from our previous examples, the default value for the select method is to select one sheet at a time. So I'm going to delete this first line of code, and after our second selection here, you can see when I hit space there is a parameter for replace, which is a true-false value. So the default is true, which means to replace the previous selected sheet. So if I put false here, what we should see when we run our code is worksheet 3 first gets selected, and then sheet 2 gets selected while sheet 3 remains selected also. So I'll hit F8 to run through this. Sheet 3 is selected. And now when I execute this line of code, both sheets 2 and 3 should be selected. And they are. So now we're going to look at inserting or adding new worksheets to your existing workbook. So I'm going to begin by typing Control and Spacebar, and going to look for the Worksheets collection. Enter a full stop, and then we're going to use this very first method called add. So I'll F8 through this, and keep in mind that currently sheet 3 is the active sheet, and you can see sheet 4 appears to the left of sheet 3 when we execute this line of code. So the default placement of that new sheet is always going to be to the left of whatever sheet is currently active. So what if we wanted to add a worksheet at a certain spot amongst the pre-existing worksheets? Well, after the add method, we can hit space, and you can see there's a little help menu, and the first argument is before. So you can either insert the keyword before and then input a colon and equals, and then state where you want that new worksheet to go, or since it's the first argument, you can also just simply type the place you want it to go. So if I hit Control and space and start typing worksheets, and this time I'm going to use the index number because I want it to go before the very first worksheet in our collection of worksheets. So I'm going to hit F8, and what we should see when I execute this is a new sheet gets added before sheet 1. And there it is, sheet 5. So we also have the ability to add a worksheet after a certain sheet. So I'm going to add a second line of code to add another worksheet, and this time we're going to use the keyword after and then a colon and equals, and what I want to do is dynamically add a worksheet at the very end wherever that may be, because we could be constantly adding new sheets and that will change, so we need something dynamic. So I'm going to reference our worksheets collection again, and then within parentheses for the index, what I'm going to do is insert worksheets again to access our collection of worksheets, and then count, because this will count all of the worksheets currently on this workbook, and that is where our placement will go at the end of that count. So I'm going to F8 through this one more time. We should see a new sheet get added before sheet 5, and there it is, sheet 6, and now we should see a worksheet get added at the very end of our worksheets. And there it is, sheet 7. So now we're going to look at copying an existing sheet. So I have sheet 3 selected, and we're going to copy it. So I'm just going to go back to our worksheets object and reference sheet 3. And we're going to use the copy method. Now, if you just use the copy method without specifying a position, what this will do is copy this to a brand new workbook. And that is very easy if that is your goal. If you want to copy a sheet from this workbook to a new workbook, it's as simple as that. So I'm going to F8 through this, and you can see a new workbook gets created called Book 1, and it has a copy of our sheet 3. But what if this is not what we wanted to do? What if we wanted to copy sheet 3 to our existing workbook? What we need to do is go back to our original workbook and our code, and after our copy method, we're going to add the keyword before or after. You could do either one, but the point is you need to specify a destination, otherwise it will be copied to a new workbook. So we're just going to keep it simple and reference our worksheets again and copy it before the first worksheet in our collection of worksheets in our existing workbook. So I'll F8 through this. What we should see is a copy of sheet 3 get added to the beginning of our worksheets. And there it is. Now the final thing we're going to look at is deleting a sheet. And the code for that is really pretty simple. We simply reference our sheet that we want to delete and use the delete method. But there is something additional you need to do. As you know, when you save, delete, do things of that nature in your workbooks, you usually get a warning message asking if you are sure you want to do the delete or whatever you're doing. This warning message will stop your code in its tracks. So to get around that, what we need to do is use application, and then we're looking for something called display alerts, and this has a true false value. We are going to set that to false because the default is true, and then as soon as we have executed our line of code, we're going to change that back to true. And you would use this same thing when you're doing other things, such as saving over an existing workbook with the same name and things like that in your code, which we'll eventually get to later on. So I'm going to F8 through this, and when I execute this line of code, we should see our branch 3 sheet disappear. And it is gone.